Continuing where we left off. It is so good to be back together. For those who need a review, all of the classes of Mishpat Tzedek are available right now on YouTube. Thank you to Yitzchak Lopez. Tonight's shiur was dedicated in honor of the Refuah Shlema of Miriam Tzipora Bat Rachel, she should have Refuah Shlema and bring us only good news. We're also praying still for Matan, and we're also praying for the neshama tonight of the Askara, the yahrzeit of my wife's uncle, Rabbanit Dvora, his name, Rabbi Shlomo Kupitz, Alav Shalom. His neshama should have Ayan Gan Eden, B'ezrat Hashem Yitbarach. Rabbi Chaim David Halevy was walking us through some foundational problems, real issues that are at the core of the question of separation of church and state in the Jewish tradition. And where we last left off was that there seems to be a sentiment among some segment of the population that in modern day Israel there is no separation of church and state, because certain areas of life are very deeply controlled or feel to be controlled by the religious establishment, be it marriage, as it pertains to the chief rabbinate of Israel, or kashrut, as it might be in the army. Right now, all of our soldiers are in the front lines. We should watch over them and protect them and bring them home safely, and not just physically, emotionally, and spiritually as well. In the kitchens of Tzahal, there's some standard of kashrut that we find. And it feels like there is some type of religious imposition on life. Rabbi Chaim David Halevy was very clear. On page 43 at the bottom, if you look in the middle of that paragraph on the bottom of the page. אלה הרואים קשר וגשר בינה לבין הדת באמצעות חוק נישואין וגירושין על פי ההלכה. Anyone who sees some type of religious connection in the state of Israel because of the laws of marriage or divorce, or באמצעות ימי מנוחה רשמיים, or because of the official establishment of days of rest, או כשרות המטבחים בצה"ל, or the kashrut of kitchens in the army, for example, טועים הם, they are mistaken. חוק נישואין וגירושין על פי ההלכה אינם תוצאה מהרצון לשמור על גשר בין הדת למדינה. These laws that exist in the state of Israel don't exist out of some desire to maintain a Jewish identity to the state of Israel. אלא תוצאה מהרצון לשמור על אחדות האומה. Rather, they stem from the desire to keep the people of Israel united, together. מי שצריך לדעת זאת יודע הוא היטב, כי ללא חוק זה יהפוך העם היושב בציון לשני עמים. And anyone who really knows understands this, that without these basic laws, the people who are dwelling in Zion, the Jewish citizens of the state of Israel, would very quickly turn into two nations. וסכנת קרע חמור באומה הנאבקת על קיומה. And it's an existential threat to the survival of the unity of the Jewish people in Eretz Israel. And it's for that reason that these laws exist in the first place. Let me try to explain to you, perhaps, with an example that happened in Israel when I lived in Israel. You may recall that there was major controversy surrounding the conversions of the Israeli army. Do you remember the questions surrounding the IDF conversions? Anyone was around for that parasha? You have two chief rabbinates of Israel. Okay, so I will help. You have the chief rabbinate of Israel, and this is a gross oversimplification, what I'm going to share now. And you have the chief rabbinate of the Israeli army. The chief rabbinate of the state of Israel has always held in very high contempt the chief rabbinate of the Israeli army. But more than that, at a certain point in time, the conversions that were being performed by the rabbis of the chief rabbinate of the Israeli army were called into question by the religious establishment in Israel. And particularly because they claimed that they were happening too quickly or too easily and that the retention rate of people who converted in the Israeli army that actually observed mitzvot and so on and so forth, it was very low. And this led to a major war between what they would call themselves, ultra-Orthodox parties, the chief rabbinate of Israel versus the chief rabbinate of the Israeli army. Yeah, not a long time before. So now what happened? What happened was that now that the conversions of the Israeli army were called into question, and until then, the chief rabbinate had always accepted the Israeli army chief rabbinate's conversions. Now there was a decision that perhaps once people leave the Israeli army, even though they were converted by the IDF rabbinate, they would no longer maintain their Jewish status in the state of Israel, meaning the Israeli chief rabbinate would not recognize the conversions of the chief rabbinate of the Israeli army. And this was going to lead to major chaos, as you can imagine. Now, the bulk or the majority, from what I understand, of the conversions that happened in the Israeli army happened with which population? Who's converting to Judaism in the Israeli military?
Russians.
So mostly Jews from the former Soviet Union, of all different flavors and stripes. And it could be Jews that are very connected to their tradition, but had questions about their paperwork when they came to Israel. And it could be people that really are not Jewish at all, but came to Israel through various laws that allowed for them to claim the right of return. And because the Israeli army is such a melting pot, there are programs in place in the Israeli army to help Israeli soldiers finish their conversions. This is part of what is a motivator, that they're fighting together, they're dying together, they're living together. We might as well help. And instead of a conversion program in Israel, which could take you years and years and years, and you have to prove yourself and find a community and move in the... None of that happens in the Israeli military. Rather, there are programs that really hold the soldiers' hands and connect them with families that will host them for Shabbatot, and courses that are taught to the soldiers, and a mikveh date that is set up. And it's a fairly, I'm not going to say easy in a negative way, but it's a very user-friendly, seemingly, system that exists in the Israeli military. Ultimately, Chacham Ovadia Yosef, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef was the chief Sephardic rabbi of Israel, was asked to weigh in to this parasha. And Rabbi Ovadia Yosef ultimately decided that the conversions done by the IDF rabbinate are completely valid, and that the chief rabbinate of Israel should continue to accept conversions done by the IDF rabbinate. At that point in time, I was with Harav Peretz. I remember we were walking out of the gates of Yerushalayim. If you're familiar a little bit with the old city of Yerushalayim, we were walking out of Shaar onto Har Etzion. We were walking towards the bus stop over there, past what they call King David's tomb. We were walking there, and I asked Harav Peretz what he thinks about the whole parasha. And Harav Peretz stopped, and he looked at me. He said, Rabbi Yonatan, from this whole story, you can learn two things. I said, okay. He said, you can learn that the Israeli rabbinate doesn't do such a great job at conversions. And the second thing you can learn from that is that even rabbis that don't do such a great job at conversions, the conversions are still valid. It's almost impossible to have a conversion that's not kasher. And with that, he smiled, and he continued walking to the bus. And that made the world blow up, because I remember the next morning, mamash the next morning, I was walking in Israel on Rehov Malchei Yisrael. Those of you who are familiar, this is the main street of Geula, Mea Sha'arim, where all the stores are, the talit stores and the bookstores and so on and so forth. And I see graffitied onto the wall. I actually have a picture in my house. Graffitied onto the wall. And it said, Ovadia Yosef, no rabbi, just Ovadia Yosef, like that. And then it says, equals Reformi, reform. And at that point in time, I remember wondering, what did Chacham Ovadia Yosef do that gave him the title of a reform rabbi? I'm not sure how the reform rabbis feel about Rabbi Ovadia Yosef joining their ranks. And I said, I'm not sure how the reform rabbis are going to feel about Chacham Ovadia Yosef joining their ranks, and nor do I like using titles of other Jewish denominations as slurs to put other people down. But that, the people of Mea Sha'arim are not known for their extreme sophistication, nor for their extreme sensitivity. And over there, what is happening? And then I saw these flyers being handed out, and there was a threat from the Haredi rabbis of Yerushalayim that they're going to make their own Sefer Yuchsin, they called it. What is a Sefer Yuchsin? They're going to make their own book recording who are Jews and who are not Jews. And regardless of what the state... regardless of what the state of Israel thinks, regardless of what the chief rabbinate thinks, regardless of what the IDF says, they're going to have a book of who are real Jews and who are not. And they're only going to marry people who are real Jews, and they're only going to accept into their school people who are real Jews. And this led to war. And for a long time, Chacham Ovadia Yosef was the hero of this whole story. He was the one who convinced everybody, hey, calm down, the conversions in the chief rabbinate are great. And this was all true until mamash recently. I'm talking a few months ago. I don't want to mention names. But as always happens, once great people pass away, the people who fill their shoes are not always so great. And the son of Chacham Ovadia Yosef got up, and he shared the same exact story I just shared with you. Except he added one detail. People came to my father, and they manipulated my father, and they lied to my father, and they made him agree to things he would have never agreed to, and he spent the rest of his life trying to undo the damage that he did, but he couldn't do it, and chaval that people remember him for that. Really, it's a terrible thing that happened in the Jewish people, that we approve of the conversions that happened in the chief rabbinate of Israel. Now, I'm telling you the story because this whole conversation has very little to do with what is the official policy of the chief rabbinate or the prime minister's office or the Misrad HaPnim, the Ministry of the Interior, about conversion, about which rabbis, about which not. Very little to do with that. And so much more to do with what will happen to the unity of the Jewish citizens of the state of Israel if we allow for A or B or we don't allow for C and D. I think it was in one of my classes recently here in New York that I mentioned what happened with that soldier who they wanted to bury her in the Jewish cemetery. Was that on camera that I said that, or was that after the class?
I believe you said that during the class.
It was during the class? Okay, if I said during the class, then we don't need to record it again.
Maybe.
B'ezrat Hashem, what you see in such a situation is that very rarely does the state of Israel make halachic decisions out of the desire to follow halakha or have a more religious state of Israel or a more Jewish presence or consciousness of the state of Israel. It has much more to do with, let's put our finger on the pulse. If we change the laws of kashrut in the army, that the army bases don't have to be kasher, and maybe whenever we have soldiers that keep kashrut, they'll come to the army base and they'll get little special package meals that have a hechsher on them. Or if that's going to be the solution, can the army actually sustain having such a system in place? Or is it just better for us to make everything kasher on some basic level of what is kashrut, and everybody will just eat the same food? And I heard already today that in the Israeli military there are different levels of kashrut depending on where you serve and what groups you come from necessarily. But at the end of the day, says Rabbi Chaim David Halevy, don't look at these particular cases of halakha and say, wow, the state of Israel maintains its religious values. The state of Israel has no separation of church and state. Rather, most of the time there's some type of status quo that has been reached, and that we know that if we undo it, all hell will break loose. And so that works in many different directions, and therefore on page 44, Rabbi Chaim David Halevy ended off with the following sentence. Im omnam yitakesh hamitakesh. So if nonetheless a stubborn person wishes to be stubborn and insist, lomar shegam be'ele dai leochiach she'en hafrada ben dat u'medinah, that even these cases they prove that there is no separation of church and state in Israel. Af anu nomar lo, will still answer him, she'achen kayam gesher dak shel niyar. Yes, there is a connection of church and state in Israel, and that bridge is made out of paper. Me'al nahar goesh v'so'er, and it's floating over a river that is frothing white and rushing. Hamehavet hakesher ben hadat u'medinah, which maintains this connection of church and state. Even if you wish to argue that Israel has some semblance of connection between church and state, it's a very, very weak bridge over a very, very strong force of water. And I think that the last year in Israel, minus the war that we're in right now, really showed us just how easy or just how real separating the Jewish nation in Israel into two different camps really was a real possibility. People really, really felt that they wanted a future, two completely different futures for the Jewish people in the land of Israel. Whatever you feel on either side, doesn't matter. But civil war is something, it's a real thing that can happen. It happened many, many times in our history, and it could happen again. And this brings us to section 4, Dalet, where we begin our shiur today after that brief introduction. Rabbi Chaim David Halevy tells us the following. Baruch, it's clear to me Shim yesh dimayon, if there's some type of comparison, ben medinatenu leven ha'avar, between our country, the state of Israel, and the past of Jewish history, harei ze letkufat habayit hasheni. It is most similar to the period of the Second Temple. Gam ata k'mאז, now and then, ha'akara hadatit ba'umah hi amuka biyoter. The religious consciousness in the Jewish people is very deep. I think when you travel around the state of Israel and ask people, are you Jewish? The answer will be, yes, I am. Is being Jewish important to you? Most people will say, yes, it is. If you were to ask them, what does being Jewish mean to you? You're probably not going to get the same answer you'll hear somewhere in New York or in Chicago or LA or somewhere else of Shabbat, Kashrut, Tefillin. You're going to hear many different things about being connected to Israel, speaking Hebrew, serving in the army, doing Kiddush on Friday night. You might hear all kinds of things. But most people are very much aware that they are Jews and that they are Jewish. Something, by the way, which we don't have here at all. You know, I've been watching the news in this country in the last 3 months. Because what's happening in Israel, we know. What's happening outside of Israel, you know, when I called one of my friends, he said, Rabbi, in the Israeli military, and I said, Rabbi, are you okay? He said, I'm okay, but I'm looking at the news about America. You guys don't look like you're okay. You know, we have an army. You don't have an army. Who's going to keep you safe? And I saw a lot of American Jews getting very upset about what they see in the campuses and what they see in the world and what they see. And I feel, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I feel that for a lot of Jews who spent the last 2 or 3 generations trying to pretend that they weren't really so Jewish and trying to hide inside of we're just regular Americans like everybody else, all of a sudden there was a slap in the face of, no, we know who you are, and we know that you're Jewish, and we see you, and we don't like you, and all of the mixing in and melting in that you thought you can do. And I'm not talking about any particular group of Jews, American Jews, we as a collective whole, as a wake-up call. Maybe we're not the same, and maybe there are people who still don't like us all these years later. In Israel, most Jews are aware of the fact that they're Jewish. Being Jewish might mean something else to them than it means to me or to you. But they're very much aware of Judaism and their Jewishness. And if you really examine Second Temple times as you examine our times, though there seem to be many breaches in the wall of faith, המתבונן המעמיק יכול להוכיח או להיווכח שאין הן פרצות בעומק אלא בשטח. If you start digging, by most Israelis, not all, we can't make statements of all, by most Israelis, their lack of religious observance is not very deep. It's quite superficial. For most Israelis that are doing Kiddush on Friday night and going to synagogue on Shabbat morning and then going to the beach afterwards, it's not out of some ideology of I don't care about Shabbat, or I don't care about Kashrut, or I don't care about God, or I don't care about mitzvot. Most of the time, look in the parentheses, b'fchinat behefker nechale. Most people like to live a life that is easy, living in hefker. But it's not malicious. It's not out of a desire to rid themselves of their Jewish identity. To the contrary. Look at all the people who go to the beach and go to the mall and they also go to the Beit HaKnesset in the morning. Look at all the people who go watch TV on Friday night, but not before they do Kiddush. Why do you look at it that so many people do Kiddush and then they go watch TV? Maybe it's the other way around. Maybe the people know in their bones today's Shabbat, but I don't do everything Shabbat says. Not because I hate Shabbat, God forbid. I like my life the way it is right now. I don't wish to get so deep, said Rabbi Chaim David Halevy, into the describing what is the state of the union of religion in the state of Israel. That's not what I came to speak about here. But in general, on page 45, I could say with safety, with confidence, that the persecution of Torah scholars in our generation that even though we are similar to Second Temple times in many ways, like he showed us last time, but the one thing that is impossible in this generation is the persecution of Torah scholars the way it was done in Second Temple times. לא רק מפני שהמדינה מושתתת על בסיס דמוקרטי בריא ויציב, not just because the state of Israel is based on strong values of democracy, אלא בעיקר, but mostly, משום שהעם בכללותו לא היה סובל זאת. Because for the most part, the citizens of the state of Israel would not accept any type of persecution of Torah scholars. כי העם היושב בציון ברובו המכריע, because the nation that dwells in Zion, the vast majority of it, רוחש הוא כבוד לתורה ולחכמי התורה. Most of the people in Israel respect Torah and they respect Torah scholars. שהיוו את מנהיגותו היחידה בכל שנות הגלות. They understand that for the most of the years of our exile, we were led by Talmidei Chachamim. Like we said last time, remember? That for most of our galut, there were no political and rabbinic leaders, or religious and political leadership. The rabbinic leadership was the political leadership. And with the founding of the Zionist movement, we suddenly had a new option. We could be led politically by people who were not religiously inclined. And that created some type of chaos and some type of friction between the religious establishment and the political establishment. But before then, and even now, most Jews are aware that they would never allow, they would never accept for the persecution of Talmidei Chachamim in our modern state of Israel. By the way, you should know that as a rabbi, I see this a lot in Israel. Ironically, as a religious Jew less, but as a rabbi, when I go places as a rabbi, I'm not walking in the street with the kippah. Come to a wedding, I come to bar mitzvah, I come to the Beit Knesset, I come to an event in Israel. The level of respect, the kissing of hands, the giving of chairs, the bringing of food, the washing my hands for things that American Jews wouldn't even dream of doing for a rabbi, is very, very real. The people of Israel don't hate Talmidei Chachamim. You know where you see this the most? I think many, many Israelis are bothered by this seeming, the Charedim don't serve in the Israeli military, they're in the yeshivot. You know that I'm not going to open this can of worms right now with you. We'll get to military service when we get there. And there's a lot of feeling of, is it fair, is it not fair? It's something quite fascinating that nonetheless, almost every Israeli government so far has always kept the status quo going. And that when you speak to Israelis on the street, my family members, for example, who are not Shomer Shabbat, they don't necessarily eat, kasher maybe in Israel, but not outside of Israel. When you talk to them about is there value for yeshiva students to sit and study Torah, and you know my stance is that the study of Torah does not exempt you from serving in the military. I'm not here I'm not splitting this parasha open. I'm observing something that I've seen. And that is that they absolutely love people who learn Torah. Absolutely love people who learn Torah. And they have zero desire. And in fact, one of my aunts put it, it's only because of them that I'm alive. Okay, listen, I would argue that some of people make coffee and go shopping and do whatever else, they eat shawarma, whatever they do. But she really believes that in the merit of people who learn Torah, she's protected. You think it's true, not true, you believe in this, it doesn't matter. But the people have a tremendous amount of respect for people who learn Torah. And I'll tell you, by the way, when it hurts the most is when those people become disillusioned with those who learn Torah. Can I tell you a story? I had someone here in the Kehillat who she went to seminary in Israel. And they were invited to a wedding. All the girls were invited to a wedding of one of the friends who got married. It's in Yerushalayim. They came to the catering hall. And the waitresses, who are waitresses at Israeli weddings? Who are they, for the most part?
Are they Arabs?
No,
Arabs.
Rarely are they Arabs.
And student Russians.
No. Many young Israelis in high school trying to make a buck over the weekends, or Israeli soldiers that are not working full-time in the army and they want to work nights or wherever else when they come home from their base and they want to make some extra cash. Very common Israeli youngsters. And this girl was 18 or 19, she was a waitress. She came And she began pouring wine at the table of the seminary girls. And she was so excited because they were religious girls, and she loved how religious girls look and how they dress and how they were so beautiful and how they were speaking so nicely between each other. And she was like really excited to meet religious girls. And this girl from our Kehillat was talking with them, and she was so happy to meet a woman who learned Torah, and it was making this girl very, very emotional. A regular Israeli girl from Haifa. Until the teacher came to the table. She saw this waitress wearing pants. She saw her wearing pants. And she told all the girls, right now you have to stop drinking the wine. The wine isn't kosher. What happened? Here's what the teacher did. The girl must be wearing pants because she's not religious. If not religious means she must not keep Shabbat. Jews who don't keep Shabbat, according to this teacher, are not actually Jewish, they're pagans. And because of that, if they touch the wine, then they make the wine not kasher, like the way a pagan would make the wine not kasher. And she made all the girls spill out the wine. The whole table. And this waitress ran away from the wedding crying her eyes out. And when the girl from our Kehillat, thank God we have people like this in our community, ran after her to walk out with her and to see what's going on. This girl told her, I don't remember if she was 18 or 19, she's like, I'm 19 years old. I was raised in a house that whenever we see religious people, we love them. Because we love religious people. We love people who learn Torah. We love everybody who keeps Shabbat because we're not perfect, but they do a lot of mitzvot for us. And my whole life I was raised to love people that observe halakha. And this is one of my first interactions ever with a group of people, women who are learning Torah, and they pour out the wine that I poured because I'm a pagan. She was screaming, Ani Goya, me? I'm not Jewish. And she was devastated. And I'm telling you this story, and my heart is broken inside. Because I'm sure it's not even a tip of an iceberg of stories that people could tell you. Your average Israeli loves being Jewish. Your average Israeli loves Torah, sees rabbis and respects them. The persecution of Talmidei Chachamim that was possible in Second Temple times would never be possible today in Israel, not only because it's a democratic country, but because Israel is full of Jews who love being Jewish. ומפני זה בלבד, קשה לתאר ולהעלות על הדעת שהכנסת תעביר ביום מן הימים. And therefore it's impossible to ever imagine that the Knesset, in any time in history, would pass a law. על כל פנים, בכל הזמן שישמר מאזן רוחני זה הקיים כיום, as long as this balance of religion and respect for religion exists in the state of Israel, it's almost impossible to imagine that the Knesset in any period will pass a law, חוק, הנוגד באופן ברור מצווה מפורשת בתורה. It's almost impossible to imagine that the Knesset of Israel would ever be able to pass a law that directly violates a principle of the Torah in Judaism. What does that mean? You can't imagine that the Knesset is going to pass a law that it's forbidden to eat kasher food in the state of Israel. That it's forbidden to keep Shabbat in Israel. It's forbidden to circumcise your children in Israel. We're changing the age of circumcision to 18 when they become adults. The state of Israel would go up in flames. Because the people of Israel believe in the Torah. But it's not because the state of Israel wants to be a Jewish country that those laws exist. But rather because so long as their finger is on the pulse, and they realize that most of the people in Israel are quite happy with their Jewish identity, then it's unlikely that we will ever experience in this time what we experienced in Second Temple times. And while we say that, I want to read to you section Hey, so that we're not behind for next week. L'umat zot, parallel to that, or opposite to that. Baruch כמו כן, it's obvious. שקיים גם שוני בין ימי הבית השני לימינו. There's a difference between Second Temple times and our times. אז then, לא הייתה המנהיגות המדינית שטח נפרד ועצמאי במסגרת הדת. The political leadership was not separate from the institution of religion. גם היא פעלה ונאלצה לפעול אך ורק באותה מסגרת שקבעה התורה. The political circles or entities of the Jewish kingdom in the Second Temple times operated within the framework of Jewish religion. וכפי שביארוה חכמי ישראל המוסמכים, and according to the interpretations of the authorized sages of Israel. וברור איפה שלא הייתה קיימת שום הפרדה בדת ומדינה. And it's very clear that in Second Temple times there was no separation between church and state. והרי כזאת הייתה אז צורת החיים בכל העולם הישן, but don't think that was unique to the Jewish people. Practically everywhere in the ancient world, there was no separation between church and state. They were one and the same. והדת הייתה להלכה ולמעשה הקובעת את אורח החיים. And halacha was what established the way of life for people in Second Temple times. ולכן אפשר להניח, and therefore you can assume, שהמאבק בין המנהיגות המדינית לבין המנהיגות הרוחנית נבעה למעשה מתוך הרצון להשיג יותר השפעה על החיים המעשיים במדינה. And therefore, if there was any fighting or quibbles between the religious establishment and the political establishment during Second Temple times, it had very little to do with theology or with democracy, and everything to do with who can have more power or more say over what is going to happen politically in the Jewish people at the time. וצרה הייתה עינם של שליטי המדינה בהשפעת חכמי התורה על המוני בית ישראל. And the politicians, those who were part of the political establishment in Second Temple times, had were very jealous of the respect or the authority which the Chachmei Israel had during Second Temple times, and that usually is why there was fighting between them. I asked you to look up a piece of Talmud from Masechet Sanhedrin. Did anyone get a chance to read that section from the Talmud? Sanhedrin 19. Let's do it together. It's a piece of Agada. נסתפק בדוגמה אחת מאותו מאבק בימי הבית השני. So we're going to have just one example from those times of the Second Temple times. Let me tell you how to get to this Gemara if you want to see an English translation. If you go to the Google Classroom, you will see that in the classwork section, there's an assignment section. I don't know if you ever do your assignments, but there's an assignment section inside of the Google Classroom. And it says, study this. One person turned it in out of 41 people. If you go to the assignment section, you will see it says study this section of Masechet Sanhedrin. And there's a link at the bottom that will take you to Sefaria if you wanted to do that there. It says the following. The Mishnah teaches, I'm in Sefaria now, Sanhedrin 19a, section 15. If you click the link, you'll find it. The Mishnah says, a king does not judge, and he's also not judged. Amar Rav Yosef, Rav Yosef says, they only taught this halakha in regard to Malchei Yisrael, the kings of Israel. Aval Malchei Bet David dan v'danin oto. But the kings of the house of David, they judge and they can be judged also. Tell me what is going on here. The kings of Israel versus the kings of the house of David. What are we talking about? Somebody in the Rabbanit's class help me out.
When they separate the two sections of the Jewish people, Israel and Yehuda.
So for those who don't believe that Jews can fight, we have had our fair share of civil wars. The Rabbanit just published a video about, I'm not allowed to the Rabbanit's classes, but I get to hear them afterwards, about a bloodless civil war. Ultimately, the kingdoms of Israel split into two. We have the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Yehuda. Yehuda are those from the family of Bet David. The kingdom of Israel for a very long time is separated from the rest of the Jewish people. By the way, when I say Kiddush, right after we say Savim Aranan, the Yemenite tradition is L'chaye Yehuda ve'Ephraim. We're pledging life to Yehuda and Ephraim. Tamnich Melech ben David b'Yerushalayim. And we ask that Kadosh Baruch Hu should put a king from the house of David in Jerusalem. We say this before we say Kiddush. Who is Yehuda and who is Ephraim? That's the kingdom of Yehuda and the kingdom of Israel. Yemenite Jews left Eretz Israel, according to their tradition, when? And any Yemenites in the room? Okay, if I'm the only Yemenite in the room, I'll tell you. During the times of Beit Rishon, the first temple times, it's very, very possible that this tefillah entered the Yemenite Siddur when you have to pledge allegiance to both kingdoms of Israel. Yet there's still a hope that one day we will be united and a king from the house of David will rule over the Jewish people. So here we're saying this is a difference. The kings of the house of David, they can judge and be judged. But the kings from the other family, they can't be. What's the reason? So my Tama, what's the reason? Mishum Maaseh Shaya. There was a story that happened. What happened? Yanai Malka, Yanai the king. Who is Yanai the king? Who is he?
He was the husband of Shlomit.
Shlom Tzion. He was the husband of Shlom Tzion, the queen. Shlom Tzion, the queen, was the sister of
Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel.
Rabbi Shimon ben Shatach. Very good. Rabbi Shimon ben Shatach. Yes? She was his sister. So meaning King Yanai was the brother-in-law of Rabbi Shimon ben Shatach. Now there was a lot of contempt the Yanai had towards who? Towards the Chachamim. Famous. I have classes about Rabbi Shimon ben Shatach on YouTube in the Rambam's playlist. You can look at there. What happened? What happened was the slave of Yanai Malka, Avded Yanai Malka, Katal Nafsha. He killed a person. Amar lehu Shimon ben Shatach lechachamim. Rabbi Shimon ben Shatach told the Chachamim, Tenu enechem bo v'nidonenu. Bring him here, put your eyes on him, let us judge him. Shalchu leh, they sent a message to King Yanai. Avdach katal nafsha. Your slave killed somebody. Shadre lehu, so Yanai sent his slave to the Chachamim. Shalchu le'ta ant nami lacha. So they told him, hey, you can't just send your slave. You have to come here too. There's a pasuk that explains that. Ata, so Yanai the king comes, ve'yativ, and he sits down. Why would he sit down? How are you supposed to present yourself in Bedin?
Yeah.
Standing up. He sits down. Why does he sit down? He's comfortable. Presumably he's a king. Amar le Shimon ben Shatach. Rabbi Shimon ben Shatach said to him, Yanai HaMelech, King Yanai, Amod al raglecha v'ya'idu b'cha. Stand on your feet, and the witnesses will testify against you. Are they testifying against King Yanai, or they're testifying against his slave?
To be his slave, but he's representing him.
Okay, very good. So stand up so they can testify against you. V'lo lefanenu ata omed. You're not standing in front of us that you can just sit down in your chair. El lifnei mi she'amar v'haya ha'olam ata omed. But you are standing up in front of the one who created the world. And like it says in the Torah, ve'amdu shnei ha'anashim asher lehem hariv. That both parties that have fought with each other have to stand up before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Amar lo. So King Yanai told who? Rabbi Shimon ben Shatach. Lo keshetomar ata. I'm not going to get up if you tell me to get up. Ela kema she'omru chavarecha. But if your friends tell me to get up, fine, I'll get up. I'm not listening to you. But I'll listen to your friends if they tell me something. So what does Rabbi Shimon ben Shatach do? Nifna limino. He turned to the judges on his right. What was he hoping to see? Whether they would agree with him. Clearly King Yanai is not happy. King Yanai doesn't want to be here. King Yanai is sitting like a person who doesn't want to be here. King Yanai doesn't respect Rabbi Shimon ben Shatach. He doesn't respect the Sanhedrin. He doesn't want to give them respect. He's the king. So he turns to the rabbis on his right, hoping that they will back him up. The rabbis on the right, what do? Kafshu panehem bakarka. They put their faces into the floor. Rashi tells us they were afraid of Yanai. They were afraid. Yanai kills people. They were afraid to get on his bad side. Nifna lismono. He turned to the people on his left, the Chachamim on his left. V'chafshu panehem bakarka. And they also put their faces in the ground. What does it mean, put their faces in the ground? It means they looked at their shoes. They were pretending to not pay attention to exactly what Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach wanted. They were in a different place. They didn't hear him. Amar lehem Shimon ben Shattach. Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach said to them, Ba'alei machashavot atem. You are masters of thoughts. You guys, look at all of you thinking so deeply at your shoes. I see you're very busy. You're deep in thought. Yavo Baal Machashavot v'yipara mikem. May the master of thoughts, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, come and punish you for what you didn't do today. Miyad ba Gavriel. Immediately the angel Gavriel came. V'chavatan bakarka v'metu. And he knocked them to the ground and they died. Chevre, this story is an agadah. Don't walk away from the story. Literally, boom, Angel Gavriel walks into the Sanhedrin, starts killing all the rabbis. There's a message to the story. We'll get there. Be'ota sha'amu, and at that point in time, the Chachamim declared, Melech lo dan velo danin oto, lo me'id velo me'idin oto. A king does not judge, nor is he judged. He does not testify, nor does anyone testify against him. Here you have an interesting story. You have a political leader who is in contempt of the rabbinic leadership of the Jewish people. Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach tries to get support from his rabbinic colleagues. Stand up to tyranny. Stand up against that which is wrong. And what do? Like good leaders, they pretend not to hear. They pretend not to notice. They cover it up. They don't care. So it's murder. But he's a very important person. You should let him get away with murder. Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach is not having any of this. And he says, you're too busy. You're too busy to take care. Let HaKadosh Baruch Hu kill you. Here, what you see in the story is a real fight between political and rabbinic leadership that does not have the courage to stand up for that which is right. Let's finish the writings of Rabbi Chaim David Halevy for tonight. 45 at the bottom. Me'ora ze eino ela רקע למאבק הקשה שהתנהל על ידי המלכות נגד הסנהדרין, על השפעה בחיי העם, בהבלטת העליונות הממלכתית מעל לחכמי התורה במושבם העליון כסמכות המשפטית העליונה של האומה. This whole story tells of a king who sees himself as above the law, who sees himself as someone who doesn't need to answer to anybody, especially not the Sanhedrin. So the Sanhedrin is in charge of the whole people, but I don't have to care about them. לאור זה, in light of that, נבין מדוע לא ויתר רבי שמעון בן שטח. You can perhaps begin to understand why Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach didn't just look the other way. והרי יכלו בית הדין למחול על כבודם. The Bet Adin is allowed to say, hey, you know what, we're not going to pick a fight with Yanai. Can the Bet Din forego their honor? Sit down, it's okay, king, you can sit down. Of course they could. So why did Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach choose to go down the violent road? Why did he not opt in for non-violent communication? What was Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach thinking? HaTosafot tirtzu ma shetirtzu. The Tosafot said whatever they said. That's a great way for Rabbi Chaim David Halevy to tell you he doesn't like what Tosafot said. Haran herich badavar. Rabbeinu Nisim, he says, וכתב, ואני אומר, and I say, שאפשר שרבי שמעון בן שטח טעה בזה. That it's possible that Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach made a mistake. He misjudged the situation. שלא היה לו לביישו ולומר לו שיעמוד על רגליו. He shouldn't have embarrassed the king and told him, stand up on your feet. שהוא מלך, he's the king. הם יכולים היו למחול על כבודם. They could have forgone their honor. They didn't have to pick a fight with him. The rabbis didn't want to join Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach because they felt he was pushing King Yanai too much. He's still the king. You can respect him. You don't have to pick a fight with him. ואחרי המחילה רבה. And after I ask for a lot of forgiveness, says Rabbi Chaim David Halevy, from the Ran, קשה מאוד בעיניי לומר על הנשיא רבי שמעון בן שטח. It's very difficult for me to say about our prince, Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach, shekol yamav haya kodesh lemilchama al Torah val kevoda sheta'a, who spent his whole life dedicated to the war regarding protecting the Torah and its honor, that he made a mistake. Dafka benukuda bahigia ma'avako al kevod haTorah l'sio, specifically in the case where the whole honor of the Torah was, this was the epitome of that war. Meaning, can Rabbi Chaim David Halevy say that Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach made a mistake? Yes, he's willing to say that. But this is a person who dedicated his life to the pursuit of demanding respect for the Torah. And in the one area of his life that he was most dedicated and most thought out in, it has to be that this was part of Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach's greater job or mission in standing up for the Torah. It wasn't a mistake in judgment. This was exactly what he came to fight for. This disrespect that the king had in front of all the people to the Sanhedrin was exactly the war that Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach was trying to fight. Baruch haya lo Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach. It was very clear to Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach. Shiyanai asa zot bechavana berura lifgoa bechachmei haTorah, that this was a very clear intention of King Yanai to harm the sages of Israel. Be'etzem ha'uvda sheba v'yashav me'atzmo b'sha'a sheba lifnei chachmei Yisrael. The fact that the king comes into the Sanhedrin and plops himself down on a chair in front of the sages of Israel, the Supreme Court of Israel, was a statement by King Yanai. And he's commanded. The law of the Torah commands him to stand. Without a doubt. It's very, very likely that Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach would have allowed the king to sit down. If only the king would have showed a little bit of respect, like, hey, can I sit down? Is it okay with you that I sit? If he would have just done that, Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach would forgo the honor of the Bidin. But once he saw the malicious intent that King Yanai had, he was correctly enraged. Because here King Yanai was making a point to make a mockery out of the sages of Israel. Zot v'od, and furthermore, אילו חשב רבי שמעון בן שטח שעשה ינאי זאת רק מתוך הכרת חשיבות עצמו כמלך, if Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach was convinced that King Yanai behaved this way only because he thought of himself as the king, and the king deserves to sit, היה בוודאי מוותר ולא מביישו לעמוד על רגליו אחר שכבר ישב, he would have already for sure let him sit down and not embarrass him to stand up. אך כיוון שבטוח היה רבי שמעון בן שטח שכל מעשה ינאי לא בא אלא לפגוע באופן הפגנתי בחכמי התורה בבית מושבם העליון, but once he saw that King Yanai came in the home of the rabbis, in the abode of the rabbis, in the chambers of the Sanhedrin, to mock them, to show them how little he cares about them, in what low regard he holds them, לא יכול ולא רשאי היה לוותר. Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach, as the head of the Sanhedrin, could no longer forego the honor of the court. Because if King Yanai would have respected the court, he could have forgone the honor of the court. But King Yanai was making a statement. We don't care about the Sanhedrin. And the Sanhedrin had to make a statement back. And the only Chacham who had the courage to make this statement among the members of the Sanhedrin was Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach. And if I could read one more sentence. כזה היה המאבק בתקופת הבית השני. This was the type of day-to-day war that existed between the political and religious establishments of Second Temple era. וזו הייתה דמותו. This is what it was like. מצב כזה אינו קיים כיום. The people of Israel today would never allow for such animosity to exist. There is no such animosity. You don't have stories where the chief rabbi of Israel, and I'm comparing him to the Sanhedrin, I ask forgiveness from everybody involved. The chief rabbi of Israel will come into the Knesset and will not be screamed out of the chambers by the prime minister of Israel. He comes into the office of the prime minister, for sure the prime minister will stand up for him. Likely it will work the other way too. I once saw Benjamin Netanyahu walking into a wedding and all these Haredim stood up for him. At the end of the day, they recognized he's the prime minister of Israel. The animosity that existed between the political and religious establishment, sure, is there friction everywhere. But what existed in Second Temple times, we are so much farther, so far away from that. And when beginning to discuss So what is the relationship between church and state in Jewish history? And trying to compare it to another period like Second Temple times. We have to also make sure that we don't make a gross oversimplification and think that everything is the same. Not everything is the same. The Jewish people of today are much more respectful, are much more deeply Jewish. I'm going to push this even farther. The Jews of today are much deeper Pharisees than they were in Second Temple times. Whereas, yes, in Second Temple times there were a lot of Jews, but there were all kinds of Jews. Even the Jews today that are broken off into 1,000 denominations, for the most part, I'm excluding some very small groups, for the most part are fighting over, wow, how good or how bad of a Pharisee are they? They're all rabbinic Jews. They're all doing Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippurim. They're all wearing tefillin, even if they don't wear tefillin, or even if they have women wear tefillin. But they're all doing rabbinic Judaism. The respect for Talmidei Chachamim is profound. And when dealing with this issue going forward, and when blaming the state of Israel for trampling religion, or blaming the religious establishment for putting a stranglehold on the Jewish people, you have to think a little deeper than that. Who is the current state of Israel? Who are the citizens of the state of Israel? Who are the Jews of the world? And only then can you reach proper conclusions. I think, though, if I might say one last thing before I end the shiur for today. I think so often we find ourselves in the shoes of Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach. I said my message, Rabbi Chaim David Halevy, I said. Now, Yonatan Halevi is sharing with you another message. So often we find ourselves in the shoes of Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach. We're standing up in the middle of the room. We're standing up to tyranny. We're standing up to illegitimacy. We're standing up to people who have grabbed authority, seized power, and are hurting Am Yisrael. And we look to our right to see if we can find support from Chachamim. We look to our left, can we find support from Chachamim? And all we see from the Chachamim on the right and the Chachamim on the left is they're too busy with their shoes. Everybody's really, really busy with things that are so not important. And the thing that we are focused on, it seems like nobody else cares about it. Nobody else is going to stand up and help you. I recently, for the first time in many years, had to take down a shiur from YouTube. Not something because I'm afraid. I'm not afraid. What people have done to me, they can't do to me more than what they already did to me. Baruch Hashem, it's like when you have a car, and your brand new car, you drive it off the lot, you're worried about getting the car bumped or dented, so you're worried your whole life. But once your car already looks like a bumped, dented, broken, so then you could drive anywhere you want because you're not worried anymore. There's nothing else that can possibly be done that already wasn't done. But I have students who came to my shiur, and some of them ask questions during the shiur. Some of those students, they go to kollel. They're kollels, they came to learn Torah. Source sheets, halakha, Shulchan Aruch, Rambam. And when that shiur went online, the kollels that they went to, or the yeshivot that they went to, threatened to pull their salaries, their stipend, their few dollars a month that they get, because they were present in such a shiur. And in order so that some of my students wouldn't get bullied and hurt and their families and whatever else might happen, I had to take down Divrei Torah from the internet. Not out of fear for myself, I have nothing to lose. I was thinking to myself, is that the Jewish world that we live in today? There's the Chachamim on the right, it's the Chachamim on the left, it's wherever you think you are. The utter disdain for Torah by Chachamim. What am I asking from Chachamim? Stand up for Torah. It doesn't have to be right, you don't have to agree with it. You can be on the right of me or on the left of me, it doesn't matter. But Torah is Torah. We cannot agree that at least we're all allowed to learn, that we're all allowed to study, that we're all allowed to ask questions, that we're all allowed to reach different conclusions. I'm not asking us to all live together and hold hands and dance. I'm not asking. Let us do what is right and stand up together against all the forces that are really hurting the Torah. Kollel students studying Shulchan Aruch is not hurting the Torah. I know you might think so. Some lay people knowing what the Rambam actually wrote is not a threat to the Torah. I know some rabbis might think so. There are real threats to the Torah. There are real threats to the Jewish people. Should I tell you a real threat to the Jewish people? Our enemies, like the Hamas. They're a real threat to the Jewish people. Where are all the Chachamim? Busy with their shoes. There are real threats to Am Yisrael. Those of us that go from place to place learning Torah together, we're not a threat to Am Yisrael. And I look sometimes at Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach and I wonder, it's one thing to have the courage to stand up against the king, against all of the power in the world. It's another thing that even when you have no friends and you have no support, and all of the chachamim that just 5 minutes ago sat with you at the same table are all pretending that you don't exist, to still stand up and say, you know what, if they won't help me, let HaKadosh Baruch Hu help me. And as we begin this new season of learning Torah together, it's cold in San Diego. The people outside, they're not walking in the streets right now. I saw some people running in the streets. I think the weather hit 54 degrees right now in San Diego. And they're freezing. We're coats, scarves, they're hiding, heaters are on, electric bills to the roof. I know you're laughing, those of you in New York are like, well, what's 54 degrees? It's the coldest night that it ever was in San Diego this last year. It was 48 degrees at night. People were losing it. It was something not normal. And as I'm looking around this cold, frozen tundra of San Diego, and I'm imagining that you're over there in New York, perhaps a little colder than we are over here. And I say, so what gives us the koach? I got back now from 2 months of teaching. What gives me the koach to stand up, if it's Seattle or if it's Mexico or if it's wherever else I am, to learn Torah, to teach Torah, and to do Torah? It's that I know that when I look right and I look left and I look right in front of me, I see you. All of your faces that are here on the camera, I see you. And I know that you exist. I know that if the whole world doesn't care about the Torah, that the people here do. Really, really do. Those of you that are learning with my wife, I don't, like I told you, I don't get invited to the classes, but sometimes I hear snippets or I hear my wife making a recording to respond to people. And I cannot tell you how impressed I am that you exist. That you exist and that you enable me and my wife and our family and our Kehillat and all of us around the world that are part of this to do what we do. And so don't give up the good fight. We're doing something incredible together. B'ezrat Hashem, we're starting a whole new season of learning Torah together. We'll continue next Monday and the next Monday until we meet in March. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu should bless us all. That if everybody in the world won't take action, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should stand with us and should take action. And first and foremost, that our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael should be safe. They should be free of all harm. And that those of us here that are living the Jewish life and are proud of what we do, that we shouldn't lose hope. You should never look around and say, wow, King Yanai is very great. King Yanai is not greater than you are. B'ezrat Hashem Yitbarach, we will continue learning next week. Thank you for learning Torah with me. Anyone has any questions or comments, please feel free to stick around after the shiur.